Welcome to the MarTech Matrix, the podcast that cogently uncovers the business problems each tech company was built to solve. Today, Sean sits down with Jason Gillespie, Head of Analytics and Data Science at RTB House, an AI deep learning marketing technology platform that aids brands in targeted advertising. Jason is at the forefront of advertising in a cookieless world. After the show, head on over to the martechmatrix.com for show notes, contact information, and details on upcoming episodes. Now, get ready to enter the Matrix.
Jason Gillespie, welcome into the Matrix. How are you, my friend?
Good. How are you, Sean? Always great to see you.
Oh, it's always good to see you. Full disclosure to the audience, Jason and I are old friends. We worked for a few years together at Criteo. Jason came in a few years after I started there and changed the way that I thought about retargeting, but also in the way that I explained it to my prospects and my clients so that we could be more educational. And what I mean by that is, I'm not even sure I've told Jason this, but we used to pitch the way Paris told us to pitch Criteo. But there was this one infamous day. I don't even think you were teaching me. I think we were with a client and you were whiteboarding something. And I'm like, oh my God, I just learned something. And here I am 4 years into working at Criteo. Jason taught me how to think about Criteo differently. I don't know if you remember that meeting. I think it was maybe Zappos or something.
Well, what I will say, Sean, is those are very kind words, and we all learn from each other. And I've learned a tremendous amount around the sales process and how to find what really matters. And I could say I experienced just as much professional growth from working with you.
Oh, I appreciate that. I think it was Zappos, and I remember them saying, this is the first time, I think maybe only time this has ever happened in my career. You were up there. Were you in this meeting with Phil Coxon? Was that you that was in it? I think
we would do sort of this under the hood road show back in the day. Yeah.
I remember sitting next to somebody on the Zappos marketing team and them closing their computer. And then they all closed their computers. They were so engaged with what you were presenting that I thought, I've got to present this way. And so I think, from that moment on, I trained my team. I made my team learn how to talk about Criteo the way that you talked about Criteo, how you explained all the sort of behind the scenes that goes on in the Criteo platform, if you will, to be able to make all the decisions that it made. And I think it really helped people understand that this wasn't just some random black box and we were guessing and just generating clicks like we were accused of, but there was actually some real thought. Like the engine understood user behavior and understood what did you call it? The pyramid, where the ad serving pyramid, where you're like, okay, this is the inventory the brands or the publisher saves to themselves. And here's where Criteo tries to get inventory before it gets to the exchanges. I mean, it changed everything for me. So thank you for that.
Well, no, thank you, Sean. I think the example was you don't want to compete with Ciroc vodka because they're paying $28 CPM, but you don't also want to buy everything at 50 cents CPM. And the more you have those relationships and the ability to bid a little higher, the better your performance marketing is going to turn out.
Yeah, look, we were always accused of, in the space, people would say, our competitors would tell our prospects, they're cheating. They've got to be doing something wrong. It's not ethical. And I could never really explain why we won every single test. We even won head-to-head tests when we weren't the incumbent, right? We were the challenger, and within 30 days we won a head-to-head test. And I couldn't explain why until that day to be able to show a brand all the steps that the Criteo engine goes through before it decides who it should retarget, how much it should retarget them for, and where, or maybe where, then how much. But and then you look at the competitor, all they were doing was buying ad exchanges. So they were just basically getting all the impressions that we decided we didn't want, right? And then even if we still wanted them, we still beat them because we knew what the user was worth. And if we didn't think they were worth that much money, they could have them. And that allowed me to defend Criteo and what we were doing at the time, based on what our competitors were saying about us. So very, very powerful. I think the takeaway there is if you can learn the tech, not just what it does, but how it works, you can be a more effective salesperson.
Yeah, that's correct. Especially when you need to sell a slightly different paradigm, right? The reason Criteo was successful in that 2012 to 2016 time period was they came into a market where performance marketers wanted performance, but weren't necessarily buying it with the right tools. They were buying it with tools that were instrumented like you were flying a 747. You can imagine you sit down in a 747, you're not going to fly that thing very well. If you sit down in a jet that just has a button that says go, it's going to work a lot better the more you let machine learning, AI, and other intelligent systems handle those nuts and bolts that you're not equipped to. And that was something that really upset a lot of the DSP industry. But eventually, the whole world actually came around to that way of thinking. And performance marketers said, let's get back to basics, and let's actually drive performance. It took Google a few years, but that's what PMax is. It took Meta a little less time. They're now calling it something like Advantage Plus. But this has now become an industry standard, and companies like Criteo, and I'd say secondarily a little later to the US market, but same principle, where I work now at RTB House, follow that same philosophy. Let's make marketing perform. It's not about giving you 900 controls, most of which simply degrade your performance from optimal. It's about giving you the performance you need.
Yeah, I think what's interesting there though is when there's a lack of understanding about how something works, there's a lack of trust, or people will just do what everyone else is doing, right? You think you can think about global politics, you could think about business, you can think about technology. If people don't understand something, they're less likely to adopt it, right? And I think that when you talk about technology that a marketer can use to increase their sales, for example, when you present the technology in a really thoughtful way, like you just described the 747, people start to get it. You mentioned RTB House. So I want to ask you, I used to always joke with our colleagues, I always understood how people that worked for Telepart or Sociomantic or Adderall back in 2011, 2012, I understood how they could come work for Criteo. We were the best. I can never understand how anyone could leave Criteo, go to somebody who wasn't the best. And I'm not just saying that for my opinion, I'm saying in the market, and with a straight face, go back to the same clients and say, no, I was just kidding. Criteo's not the best. Telepart's the best, right? Like that doesn't work. I think you lose credibility I could never do that. Now you left Criteo and went somewhere else first into a different space for a couple of years. But then when you were looking for something new, you decided to go to RTB House, which is now a direct competitor of Criteo, not one that we really had when I was at Criteo. How do you I want to say, justify that to people that you spoke to when you were at Criteo?
Yeah, great question. I think, the basic premise that one must consider in any environment driven by technology is that the best is likely to be very dynamic over time. The thing that was the best before Criteo was displaced by Criteo. It's very likely that there will be the next best thing to displace Criteo. So you're right, you can wait until you're insured of going to the best, or you can take a little bit of a gamble and you can say, hey, I've kicked the tires, I've investigated this technology, I think it has the potential to be the best. And when I investigated everything about RTB House, I concluded that that was at least a possibility, because they have been a deep learning, a neural network-based engine from day one, before all the hype and hoopla with ChatGPT and other generative AI technologies. So I felt like, wow, the world is really morphing in that direction. Criteo still has more market share. They're a public company. They have certain things about them that you might still characterize them as a leader, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their underlying technology is always the best.
No, that's fair. I think I want to come back to explaining what neural networks are. And maybe my question here aligns. I remember hearing about RTB House in their early days in the US. And for the record, they come from Poland. They're headquartered in Poland. But when they first started coming over to the US, one of our former colleagues went to work for them. And I kept hearing deep learning. And I was like, oh, deep learning. This is another buzzword. So does deep learning and neural networks, like, are they connected in some way? Like, define those terms for us.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that colloquially, those are used interchangeably. The more significant difference is the difference between deep learning or neural networks and what I'll call traditional machine learning approaches. In a traditional machine learning approach, you have to spend a lot of time getting your data nice and neat and clean. Imagine an Excel sheet with columns across the top and rows, and every cell has a nice, clean data value in it. People like me, we get really excited about things like that as a head of data science. I love nice, clean data. But the problem is, that's not the way the real world works. A neural network is basically a mathematical model of what goes on inside your brain. And if you think about how humans consume information, we consume it through various input devices. They're called your eyes, your nose, your skin, all your senses. It's continuous, it's unstructured, it's ongoing. And so when you have a system that has this sort of continuous, unstructured, somewhat random inflow of data, the same way that humans can manage that is likely to be beneficial in the online world. And certainly the stream of what goes on an e-commerce site, for example, is very analogous to the stream of what comes in through your eyes, nose, mouth, skin, and ears. It's unstructured, it's hard to predict, and you need a way to deal with that without having to stop and call timeout every so often and regularize your data and worry about missing values or things that are out of ranges. All the things that are gotchas when using like a traditional machine learning approach. Not all of them, some are better than others, but neural nets and deep learning really excel at handling data the way a human would handle data.
Interesting. So in other words, does it pass the sniff test?
Yeah.
You know, when you smell something, you're like, oh, is that marshmallow? Is that like a fire pit? Like, you know, you're trying to figure out what the smell is, and what you think it is changes over time. Just like what you might be looking for changes over time when you're shopping. So at a technical level, how does RTB House differ from Criteo?
Yeah. So, you know, I can't discuss in detail, you know, the internal technical nature of Criteo, but RTB House was founded on deep learning, right? So from the DNA up, we are all about using the neural network approach. The implication for marketers is the following. If you have a fundamentally different mechanism for analyzing what people do on your site compared to, say, what Criteo's doing, what Google's doing, what most other players are doing, you're likely to reach different people. You're likely to value different people differently. You're likely to, you know, drive different kinds of transactions. You're likely to produce creative that looks and feels a little bit different. For a marketer, that's a good thing. So you can certainly keep your partners that are working, but we believe we're sort of this additive solution where, hey, I like what I'm doing, but wow, you guys do a lot of things differently. Let me try you out kind of in addition to what's going on and see what sort of results we get. And what we find is there tends to be like an additive lift. Like if you love getting a 4 ROAS, for example, but you can only spend 50,000 with your incumbent partner, it'd be great if you could spend another 20, 30, 50, 80,000 with another partner and still get the same great 4 ROAS. That's kind of the fundamental thinking here that we try to talk about in the marketplace.
Got it. So retargeting, at least from what I remember from my experience at Criteo, it was heavily dependent on third-party cookies. Drop the cookie on the user's browser when they came to a retailer's website. We followed that cookie around to every publisher, every website they went to where we had our own Criteo tag, right? So we could pick them up. And then we would use that data to make our predictions and decide which users we wanted to serve ads to and how much they were worth and so forth. How do you do that in a world where 50% of the cookies are gone, right? When you think about the browsers that don't allow you to drop cookies, third party. And then we all know the Google story and they keep delaying it, but eventually cookies are going to be gone altogether. So we're told. How does RTB House think about the future of retargeting? Are you already addressing it because 50% of the people you can't drop a third party cookie on, or are you taking a wait and see approach? What's the plan?
Yeah, so you have to sort of cleave the world now. The cookie was this universal solution. It worked everywhere 10 years ago, but it had serious drawbacks. There's absolutely no data security associated with it. And it's kind of like going to the world's least exclusive nightclub. They let anybody and everybody into those auctions, and anybody and everybody bids on that user. And so you get fraud, you get all sorts of activity that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So it was probably time for some alternative solutions to appear. And when Apple took away the third-party cookie, people sort of yelled and screamed, but said, well, I can refocus my business on either the small fraction of Apple folks who have manually enabled that third-party cookie, the probably even smaller fraction for whom some sort of alternative identifier like an IP address works, or dig in on Chrome. Now things are getting serious because about 4 years ago, Chrome was supposed to get rid of cookies, and companies like RTB House said, hey, we have a great business. We're an advertising company. Google, you're an advertising company. Why don't we put our heads together and talk about how we can keep advertising working without the cookie? And Google's solution was to create this foundational layer called Privacy Sandbox. And unlike a lot of things that very large companies or market leaders do, they didn't develop this in a vacuum. They went out to market participants and said, what do you think about this? What does it need? What is it missing? Where do you see gaps? So as RTB House, we went and actually made some very specific proposals around making sure that you could still make very precise bids and target users appropriately and generate creative that would resonate with the user. And those particular pieces of technology were incorporated in the final version of Privacy Sandbox. And for that reason, as long as you're engaged with Google, and it's not a trivial effort, you have to spend a lot of engineering resources, you have to integrate with all the APIs, you have to figure out how to make it all work. But if you're willing to do that lift, you can continue to make this sort of one-to-one retargeting operate in a cookieless environment on Chrome. The question people often ask me is, well, how do you apply that, outside of Chrome? And because it's a Google-based solution, it's not Google's problem to solve what goes on outside of their technologies. So they've said, we're going to solve this on our technologies. We don't control what goes on in other browsers. Apple sort of runs their own show, but some of the other browsers, Edge, potentially Opera, Firefox, have said, hey, if this thing works, and Google has submitted to make it a W3C standard, we might want to have something like this in our browsers also. They've also said we might want to do something like this for Android. It'll be after they tackle web. Web is sort of the version 1.0 where the bugs will be worked out. So this basic mechanism of doing things in the browser a little more basically will allow, imagine like data points being stored in the browser.
Okay.
Instead of solely stored by the ad tech. The ad tech still sees everything that goes on the e-commerce website, can still model, can still apply the deep learning, can still predict who, through the exposure to an ad, is likely to have an incremental purchase. We can still do all that great magic. The challenge is finding that same person when they're on, say, the LATimes.com, CNN.com. Those websites will now call the browser to run a privacy auction, and the browser will then only inform trusted vendors, parties like RTB House that have their tags directly on the e-commerce website, to then bid. We'll send a bidding formula into the browser, which will marry with those data points about the user, such as what they looked at, and allow us to continue to do very precise bidding out into the SSPs based on the user's first-party data. So that's how technically it all links together, and why not only will the power and performance likely be retained, but it'll actually be better for two reasons. First, the way it works now, it sounds all cool and cute and easy that, oh, there's a cookie, so we'll just find that person. But behind the scenes, there's a thing called a cookie sync. And a cookie sync is where you have to sync your cookie with the LA Times cookie and the SSP cookie, and then sync it, on the advertiser side. And anytime there's a sync, there's loss of data. So if you lose, 10 or 20% at the ad side and you lose 20% on the pub side, maybe you've lost 30% of the audience because the cookie sync hasn't gone. Well, in the Privacy Sandbox solution, because there's no cookie syncing, there's no loss of identity. There's no loss of audience. So in theory, you have a gain there. The second thing is I mentioned that only trusted vendors can bid in a Privacy Sandbox auction through what's called Protected Audience API or PA API. Well, when you remove a lot of the quote unquote untrusted vendors, you'll have fewer bidders, which should imply a lower final clearing price for the same impression, which means more value can be transmitted back to the marketer themselves. So there are two potential wins here. One is kind of clearing out the underbrush of all the bidders that shouldn't really be there, people, bidding on audiences, buying audiences, like all that malarkey sort of goes away, right? I'm buying an audience of 18 to 24-year-olds that live in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. No, you're not. If you actually looked at that, most of those people are probably 50-year-old guys in New York City.
Or bots. Yeah.
Right? So that's all going away, as it should, because it's basically wrong.
Yeah.
So
third-party data is crap. Yeah.
Third-party data is crap. So we're gonna double down on what matters most: first-party data, high-fidelity audiences, and trusted vendor bidding. And our hope, we don't know for certain yet because it's only 1%, actually 0.75% of all Chrome browsers where this is enabled. Our hope is to actually show that performance increases through the deprecation of the third-party cookie in a retargeting context.
Well, it should increase if the clearing price is lower as well.
That's right.
How do the publishers involved in this conversation?
Indirectly, the SSPs are involved. So the SSP is the representative of the publisher.
So how do they feel about it? Because I mean, it sounds like it's a win for everybody, but the key thing that you hit on was like it's going to lower the clearing price. It means they're going to make less money.
Yeah, on the pub side, right? They're all about yield, CPM, what percent of ads am I selling through versus having to fall into some super low CPM bucket of just remainder inventory. So they're going to take a data-driven approach just like we are on the advertiser side. There's no free lunch here, right? So on the one hand, they might clear some ads at a lower CPM, but on the other hand, they might clear more of their ads through this mechanism and have less fall further down the waterfall. So they're going to look at kind of how they're netting. What my hope is again, because of the higher fidelity and no loss of identity through cookie syncing, there's upside there for the pubs too.
Got it. And does Google decide what pubs? I know they're going through the SSPs. But how is there any like a quality assurance that the brands get? In other words, are they from a brand safety perspective? Will the advertisers be guaranteed that their ads aren't appearing on questionable sites?
Yeah, good question. I don't think it's inherent to the API itself. And what I mean by that is the SSP actually calls the protected audience API. So the flow of information is from the SSP to the API. So there's all the standard brand safety protections that exist now will still exist right at the SSP level, and then also at the buyer level, because the auction itself will know what website that the ad is going into. So I don't think that world changes dramatically right now, though I would expect it to improve a little bit, again, because when you wipe out the lower tier of buyers, I suspect that that's where you're more likely to have less brand safety.
So the way you described it, and maybe I missed something, but the way you described that process with tapping into the user's browser, how is that creating more privacy for the user?
Yeah, because imagine that as RTB House, we know that a user went to, say, Macy's.com, looked at a bunch of shoes and looked at a bunch of shirts and all that, blah, blah, blah. Great, awesome, because we have our tags on the site. Nothing changes there. The thing that changes is when that user, Jaysen Gillespie, goes over to the LA Times, I can't know that Jaysen Gillespie, that's like Jaysen Gillespie 2, and Jaysen Gillespie 1 in the data shows up on the Macy's. It's that inability to connect across sites that is the dramatic increase in privacy, because where your privacy is eroded is not by RTB House knowing the shoes you looked at online. It's that knowing that I looked at those shoes and then went to go and see where someone might get an abortion, or went to go and see where I donate to my favorite political candidate, and stringing all that together. That's the huge privacy violation that goes on now with the third-party cookie.
So if I'll use myself as an example. If I go to Macy's, shop for some shoes, and then I go to the LA Times, and then there's a call from the LA Times saying we have a user here. There's an auction available. What data does RTB House or anyone else that's bidding get on me, the user, to help inform the value of me and the creative?
Yeah, so great question. So as a trusted vendor, you're allowed to ask the browser to insert certain specific data elements, first-party data, from the advertiser into the browser. So each ad tech, remember that what Privacy Sandbox is a foundational layer. Each ad tech will build on top of it using a little different flavor. So for example, if you thought it was important to have a list of, say, the last 10 products someone looked at, you could instruct what's called the interest group within Privacy Sandbox to hold those key data elements.
Gotcha. So then so in the browser would contain the last 10 products viewed, and then that would be passed to RTB House at the time of the auction, so that you can
not necessarily pass to RTB House, but it could be data elements that we could pass a formula into the browser and say, for example, if the last 10 elements included one of a SKU in this set of SKUs, increase the bid 25%. So we don't even have to know what those elements are. We just have to know how to apply those elements to the bid we'd want to make.
Okay, but from a retargeting perspective, how do you know what products to show in the ad?
So I mentioned that there were two things that we proposed that we needed. One was storing those data elements in the browser so that we could make smart and precise bidding. The other is something about how we generate a creative. And again, that's also part of the PA API. It's something called product level turtle dove or something, sort of code name like that within the API. But there is a piece of the API that allows us to sort of do something similar. And it basically says, hey, if someone looked at this particular product, here is the set of related and other products that we think would make sense to show on the ad, and feed that into the browser.
Yeah, now how would that apply to your competitors?
So all ad techs have access to the same APIs. So again, everyone will build sort of different flavors on top of this thing. It's kind of like a restaurant with great ingredients and no one in it. And we're the chefs, right? We're all going to make our own menu. We're all going to cook things slightly differently. We're all going to have a slightly different dining experience. At the end of the day, you're going to get a meal. But different ad techs are going to approach that very differently.
So at the end of the day, you're getting the information that you need to make a determination, a business decision, and a creative decision without actually following the user around the internet.
That's right.
That's brilliant. God, why didn't you say that in the beginning?
I'd love to say that it was us. It was Google who, of course, had that fundamental idea, right? It is brilliant because it's a great way of solving that paradigm of how do I increase privacy while also retaining the power and the performance that this kind of user level marketing has evolved to over time.
So if all of the vendors get to put their wish list, if you will, into the browser, right, into the sandbox,
which they don't. You had to do this 4 years ago, right?
Okay.
Google's rolling this. You can't just show up now and be
I get it.
I didn't talk to you for 4 years, but now that this is actually working, can you do X, Y, and Z? They're going to be like, hey, yo.
Can I have a loan while we're at it? No, I guess what I'm going to say is like, so now all of this data, for whoever was participated 4 years ago, all of this data is being collected in the browser. Google has access to that data, do they not?
Well, I can't answer that for certain because my name's not Mr. Google, but the fundamental principle is when you store things in the browser, it has some elements of like a first-party cookie, right? Google doesn't necessarily have access to that. And in fact, the user, one sort of privacy enhancement that Google's making is a degree of transparency. They'll show you each interest group you're in. You can blow the data away if you want. So there's much more user control over these data elements.
So are there walls? I mean, I don't know if you know this answer, but are there walls at Google between Chrome and everything else to protect that data from everybody else?
Well, here's what I can say, because Google is subject to what's called the commitments, which is a UK term for the UK Competition and Markets Authority is actually controlling the timeline. One point I'll raise here, people are like, why isn't Google just getting rid of the cookies? Google doesn't control the timeline on this. It's controlled by the UK CMA. The UK CMA is actually accepting market participant feedback until June 30th. So if you act fast, depending on when this thing's published, if you act fast enough, you can still get your comments into the CMA. CMA is going to take between 2 and 4 months to review that. Look, it's government. Great, folks, but usually overburdened. So they're probably going to need 4 months. They're going to make some sort of ruling around November 1st regarding what Google will be able to do after that. So stay tuned. It's going to be interesting. The CMA could say, hey, this is awesome. Everybody loves it. Just get rid of the cookies. The CMA could say, hey, there's some issues. We'd like some things to be corrected. Why don't you go to maybe 10 or 20% so we can have a more robust test? We'll see what they say.
It's interesting to hear you explain that, because at no point in the past several years have I heard anyone blame anyone other than Google. Google delayed it again. Google delayed it again and again. It's not Google. It's this
It's
UK organization.
It's sort of crazy how little people are interested in understanding the facts, because everything I just said has been true for at least this entire year, if not before that.
Fascinating.
And publicly stated by both the CMA and Google.
Well, there's facts.
But hey, believe what
facts.
you want to believe. I'm going to stick to the truth, but you're welcome to have your alternative facts as you see them.
So what about, I think, if I'm not mistaken, RTB House also has other types of products, right? Not just retargeting, right? There's full funnel, mid-market, upper funnel. How does this Privacy Sandbox, is it impact those products at all? How are you operating differently than, say, oh, I'll just go to the trade desk and I'll buy my target audience and deliver ads across their platform based on whatever my criteria is? How does it differ? How does it impact it with the RTB House?
So, our view, and I don't want to speak for the whole company, but my personal view at least, is that a lot of upper funnel tactics where it lies on buying a specific audience, as we talked about earlier, basically get blown away because you can't construct those audiences nearly as effectively, not with as much scale. You'll have to do it through like logged in users and things of that nature. So the upside is the fidelity of the audience buy will be a lot higher, but the scale will be a lot lower, right? The system we've evolved to now with the cookie is this thing with enormous scale and incredibly low accuracy. So it's probably better to buy at smaller scale, but be accurate, right? In who you're buying. So our approach is great. We've never really bought into the current paradigm, so there's not much to lose there. But there's an opportunity, and the opportunity is an AI-driven opportunity. We call it Content GPT, which is where we basically better leverage information about the publisher web pages themselves. These web pages, are still being bought on keywords or just general, like it's a sports page. But really, now with large language models, you can really understand by quote unquote reading the page and applying some intelligence whether that page is likely to have the kind of person you might want. Are you someone who's an auto intender? Are you someone who's looking for a home? Right? You can get a much more precise understanding of user intent. And we think that that's probably the future, like advanced contextual, I'll call it, the future of upper funnel as opposed to audience construction.
Okay, but what about a scenario where maybe I am in market for a car, and I'm on a sports page and looking at the standings for the National League. How do you infer? How do you get from I'm looking at my baseball team's information to I'm in market for a car?
Yeah, you don't. No, the intent of the AI is to better identify pages that one fall through the cracks now, and two, a lot of the ads when you're like, I'm in the market for a nice watch, so they're just like, oh, this talks about time or timing or timelines, and there's a page about like, is it time for your wedding or what's your timeline for engagement? Not necessarily relevant, right? Getting rid of that kind of thinking and using the AI to better understand that doesn't necessarily help you on very general or super heavily trafficked pages because they're not generally as specific. It's harder to infer there. And that's going to be an issue for the publishers, frankly, to figure out how they better monetize those audiences.
Is this where we get into publishers doing whatever they can to collect as much data, first-party data on their readers or viewers than they've ever had to do before? In other words, if I'm the New York Times and I know that for every reader that comes in, they log in, I know where they live, I know what gender they are, I know if they have kids, if they own a house, and I know what their favorite sport is, what their favorite food is. Like, I'm asking them questions, maybe not all at once, but over time, then leveraging that data to sell advertising either through direct sales or an SSP or DSP.
Absolutely. If I'm a pub, of all those words you said, the key one was login. There's going to be a huge difference between the authenticated web and the unauthenticated web. As soon as I move you out of the anonymous or unauthenticated web into the authenticated web where I know who you are and can apply all sorts of historical information about you, what you've looked at, I'll have pop-up surveys to dig into who you are and what interests you. I can now make incredible direct sales or bundle it into, a PMP or specified, more advanced targeting through an SSP. I unlock a huge amount of value. For that reason, you're going to see the rise of the paywall, but really almost the rise of the free wall. And the free
Yeah.
wall is I just need you to log in and tell me who you are so that I can generate ads, generate a much higher CPM, and in exchange, give you like this very valuable content.
Yeah, I like the term free wall because I was thinking that as you were speaking, everybody gets, people that don't understand how the internet works are like, oh, I just want my content for free. Well, nothing's free. Like my kids complain about the ads all the time. I'm like, what are you complaining about the ads for? Like, you're getting free content. That's how you're getting the ads, getting the content. And there's lack of appreciation for that. And I think if you put up that wall and they start they'll learn, hey, nothing's free. I either got to give them something or I got to pay. I don't have to give them my information, but then you have to give them your credit card.
Yeah. And again, frankly, when you get rid of the third-party cookie, you force publishers to do things that they should have been doing a decade ago. They leaned on this third-party cookie as a crutch. They always should have owned and been seen as a first-party data solution. They'd be in less of a bind, frankly, now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always talk about the laziness of a marketer, right? And what I mean by that is it's not meant to be an insult. It's just that they've been lured in by these MarTech companies that have been leveraging third-party cookies, and they're saying, hey, just put our tag up on the website. It's the old Criteo speech. Just put our tag up on the website. We're going to do everything. Just pay us. Just put your bid in. Just pay your bills, right? We're going to track the user behavior on your website. We're going to track where they go on the internet. We're going to determine which ads we serve. Trust us. We know which ads, which products to serve better than you do. We'll put the creative in front of the right user at the right time, and we'll generate you sales, and you're going to be happy. And everyone was like, that's great. And then people started to complain about, oh, well, you're a black box. We don't see anything. It's like, well, yeah, we told you that when we signed you up. Like, we're going to do all this work for you. Like, that's how we make our money. It's our secret sauce, right? We have the data. If you want the data, collect it yourself and do your own retargeting, and we'll go away. But they didn't want to do that. But now they're getting to the point where they have to gain more visibility into their first party data to be more effective in their overall marketing. Now they can still hire an RTB house who's doing some of that with AI, for them. But I think brands do need to sit up and say, you know what, I need to own my data. I need to have more control over my data, just like the publishers do. They need to step up and go, we need to understand who our users are. The question I have for you, and I don't know if you have an answer for this, in that publisher scenario where there's this free wall, now you got to tell me something about yourself. How do we know they're not lying?
You don't. So, I mean, that's a risk of the internet. Now, you might be able to triangulate a little bit, right? If I say I'm 99 years old, that's not super probable. Or, you could look at how fast I'm clicking through pages and deduce that, a 99-year-old can't operate that quickly. So there's probably all sorts of basic gut checks. You can also re-ask over time for information. So generally, I think people, there's a sense, I would encourage honesty by saying like, hey, we're going to ask you how old you are. Here's why we're going to do that. Because if you tell me you're 24, I'm going to show you sort of these sorts of ads. If you tell me you're 57, I'm going to show you these sorts of ads. Most people would, given that you're going to have to see some ads because we got to stay in business, right? The point you raised, there has to be some appreciation. We've got to pay our bills to give you this content. Would you rather the ads we show you be more relevant or less relevant? Usually people, again, everyone would rather have no ads. But in the real world where you need ads, people systematically say they'd rather have more relevant than less relevant ads. And I think saying, great, then give us the data points that are truly about you so we can make those ads more relevant.
Yeah,
that would be my pitch as the pub.
Yeah, you just said what I was thinking was, look, if you lie to us, you're going to get a bad ad experience. If you tell us the truth, you're going to get a relevant ad experience. And, I can equate that to Facebook. Like, I go on Facebook, and first of all, my feed is full of ads. There's more ads than my updates on my friends.
You're a valuable man.
And every ad is relevant to me. I think it's because Facebook listens to my phone and knows what I've been talking about. But if I look at one product or the product last week, and then I got ads from like 5 other competitors who have never even been to their website, but they're relevant, sort of. I already bought the product, but they don't know that. I'd rather have that, except it makes me second guess, than ads for, I don't know, camping gear. I'm not going camping. So, I think that's what people need to understand, especially, generationally understand that don't lie. It's going to be bad for your own experience. What are some of the things a brand or a marketer needs to think about when they're like, hey, I've been working with Google remarketing, I've been working with Criteo or AdRoll. what should they be thinking about in terms of should they speak to somebody at RTB House? Is RTB House a good fit for them? Whether it's retargeting or upper funnel, like what's the litmus test there? How do you take their pulse?
I mean, my most important litmus test is, do you need to drive more performance? Do you need to drive more scale at a given level of performance? Because really that's what our solution is engineered to do. It's great if you're using Criteo and you like it's kind of like Obama. You like your Criteo, you can keep your Criteo, right? Just add us on and get more scale at the same ROAS. And then I think down the line, there's a little more subtlety to the conversation. And the subtlety is around the difference between incremental and attributed sales. Because everybody starts off on the attributed side because it's real time. And as soon as a sale occurs, you know all the vendors who touched it beforehand, and you can make some estimate of attributed sales. But the ground truth is really incrementality. And incrementality done right, meaning not from some quote unquote third party MTA nonsense, but a real true population split with medical grade methodology, where it's a blind random control sample where one group gets the marketing treatment and the other does not. And then a full analysis of how one group has performed versus the other. We find that that's one of deep learning's strengths. The AI, believe it or not, actually tends to show ads to people that are more incremental than traditional machine learning approaches. That's because it not only understands what happens when an ad is shown and people click and convert, it studies people who come to your website and aren't shown any ads. And if you look at the difference in behavior with no ads and with ads, well, that is incrementality. And therefore, you can start to target on incrementality as opposed to on just driving attributed metrics.
Yeah. How does that play out if you're a brand marketer or a performance marketer and you're advertising on multiple channels? You're advertising on Meta, maybe TikTok, RTB House, and maybe the Trade Desk. How do you, and I get how you would run an experiment, right? Serve them an ad or don't serve them an ad, and then you measure your lift. But how do you control for other channels that you don't have visibility into? Is that where a third party measurement company comes in, or is there another methodology?
So not for us, right? We basically say, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Do it across all your marketing. That way it's your baseline. So those marketing channels continue to get marketed to in our control group, and our exposed group is those channels plus us. So it's an effective measurement of, are we incremental in the context of everything else you're doing? Now your sort of embedded question there is, well, then how do I see if those channels are incremental? That's a discussion you'll have to have either with those channels or some sort of third-party solution that can attempt to measure it for you. Some of those channels are fairly true. I think Meta has a decent product that they'll, show you lift and so forth. Affiliate, for example, is on the other end of the spectrum. They're always very reluctant to give you effective mechanisms for judging the incrementality of that discount code that people click on at the last second. Not incrementally, didn't hear that from me, just to drive an attributed sale.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with you on the affiliate stuff, and I don't know why marketers spend money on it as much as they do, and they know from their own behavior the only time they use a coupon code is when they're at the point of purchase. You've already made the decision. Why give the credit to somebody else? I mean, I get why it's there. Would I have bought it without the coupon? I guess you have to test that. I don't know. Probably. Okay. So is there a sweet spot for RTB House in terms of client size? Like, can you be too small for RTB House?
Yes. So one thing about deep learning, it actually requires a little more data than machine learning, because the amount of manipulations that go on in a neural network model can be 1000x what it is in a basic machine learning model. And for that reason, you do need to have, a certain site volume. So this isn't a long tail play. The other thing where deep learning really shines is on like the very large SKU sets, when you have that long tail on SKUs, because when you're thinking about like recommender systems and figuring out what to go in the ads, it's hard for those systems to address the long tail because they're statistically driven and they need a certain amount of very precise data. Deep learning is sort of more of a fuzzy algorithm. So it will lump together various kind of connected products and better address the long tail and the large SKU set when it's thinking about constructing an ad that's product-based.
Excellent.
So basically, mid-size to greater, and the more you sell, the better.
Okay, that's fair. Right? People maybe listening may have got excited. Maybe they're just not a good fit, but we can help them figure that out. What's in terms of getting started? Is it pretty easy? Is it like it used to be at Criteo? They just put something up on their website and then you guys go to work, or given that your model is different, is there any other integration process?
The integration is the same as it is with Criteo or any other ad tech. It boils down to generally two things: tags on site and a feed.
Okay.
Right? That's what we need in order to make the rest. We sort of handle the rest for you.
So given everything that's happening in our world around AI, can you give us any updates or any insights as to what's on the RTB House roadmap, or what is it going to continue just to keep refining retargeting and acquisition display, or is there something else coming that we can get excited about?
Yeah, I think right now the bulk of the efforts are on things related to the loss of the cookie, right? Because as you can imagine, someone said, do you need first-party data? I said, yes, sort of the way a fish needs water. Like, this is pretty mission critical, right? To keep retargeting working for marketers, especially as the next leg up in deprecation is likely to be right after peak period ends. Everybody's going to be nervous about 2025. So a lot of our development effort has been really for the last 3-4 years in the Privacy Sandbox with Google. Secondarily, we're also looking at sort of alternative IDs that are out there, and do any of those make sense? They probably don't have the scale that a Privacy Sandbox has because you have to be logged in on the pub site and on the advertiser site, but it could be another way of directly connecting people's behavior. Not quite as private, but an interesting solution. So between those two and then something like a content GPT that better understands kind of how publisher pages reflect intent. So hyper advanced contextual, better integration with the Privacy Sandbox. We think those are the big wins going forward here.
Do you have any advice for any performance marketers out there that are just looking to increase sales, reduce CAC, if they're contemplating RTB House? Any advice you can get them based on what you know about what's happening in the ecosystem, especially around third-party cookies?
Well, now's the time to test. The thing about first audit all your marketing vendors and see who uses a third-party cookie. You can ask them, they'll lie, then do the Chrome versus Safari test. If you're not getting the same performance from your vendor on Chrome versus Safari, they're probably using a third-party cookie. That's why it's worse on Safari. Then isolate your risks and start having discussions and integrations with vendors that you think are going to be cookieless first. So once you've said, hey, I'm doing these 2 or 3 mission critical things, go out and find vendors that you think sort of have the chops to make cookieless work. And then kind of keep your eye on these alternative IDs, but be careful of ones that are very privacy insensitive, like fingerprinting or probabilistic ID values. That's kind of my advice for marketers right now.
Excellent. Jason, I think we want to wrap it up there. Unless you have anything else you want to share with the audience, I think this has been truly one of the most informative conversations I think we've had on the show.
Well, Sean, thank you for that. It's been great to be here with you, and it's always great to see you, and I hope I see you again soon.
Likewise, Jason, thank you for being inside the Matrix. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
This episode of the MarTech Matrix was brought to you by the Cogent Collective, a community of marketing and e-commerce leaders. Learn more at cogentcollective.com. For show notes and information on upcoming episodes, head on over to the martechmatrix.com. If you would like to learn more about the companies appearing on this podcast and see if they're a good fit for your company, send Sean a note at sean@cogentcollective.com. New episodes of the MarTech Matrix podcast will drop every Monday, so be sure to subscribe with your favorite podcast network so you can stay on top of what's happening in the Matrix.